And these are going to be auctioned off, I believe, at the end of the day today. So I'll try my best not to mess it up. So, all right. So I haven't had a ton of time to really look at this tree and figure out what I want to do. But that's not a bad thing, because we can go through this process together as a group, and I'll sort of explain my thought process and how I design a tree from raw or semi-raw material, which is what this tree is right here. Now, this tree's obviously had some work done to it over the last few years. There's a lot of movement up in the upper portion of the tree here that was added in by someone at some point. So we're going to use that to our advantage. But typically with a piece of material like this, what I'm going to do is start with the base of the tree and work my way towards the top. So 9 times out of 10, what we're going to be looking for is a radial nabari or the widest root structure on the tree, so the surface root spread on the tree. That might be a little bit hard to see from where you guys are. Maybe I can tilt it forward a little bit here. Right? We've got a lot of really nice plants in here that we can use for accent plants later today when we finish this. Right? So if we just ignore these for right now, though, what we're going to do is look at the base of the tree to start with. So what I do with a plant like this, I want to clean off some of this structure here, some of the dirt that's covering the structure of the base of the tree, and see what's going on. We're going to do the same thing with that tree over there in a little while. But I want to see if we can find a little bit of surface root structure under here. So I'm just going to use a wire brush to do this. Right? I doubt there's going to be much of a radial root structure on this tree. Typically with conifers, unless they're grown in a very specific way right from the start, they're not really going to have much of a radial root structure, but there should be a view from one side or another that's wider, or the widest view, and I want to show that off if at all possible. Now if we do have a radial root structure, that's even better and we can show that off, but like I said, 9 times out of 10 you're not going to have something like that on a conifer like this. And it's even more the case when you're working on yamadori. Now, I know you guys here don't have much yamadori, at least you don't have any pines and junipers in your mountains here. So you have to kind of work with field-grown material or stuff that's grown from seedlings or cuttings and container-grown. So this piece of material here, though, has a lot of potential. It's been grown in a very specific way for, I don't know, how old would you guess this tree is? No idea. Okay. I'd say, probably somewhere around 30 years old or so. It's got nice fissured bark. The bark fissures all the way up to about this area here, and then you've got the new growth over the last few years at the top here that hasn't fissured up quite yet. But it's been grown quite well for at least probably 30, maybe even 40 years. Okay, so we're really not showing too much off here with the root structure at the base of the tree. However, there are a couple of views here where the base is quite wide. So from where you're viewing right now, this is quite wide through here. If we spin it this way, this is actually quite wide through this area here as well. From this front, it's a little bit narrower, kind of right through here. We've also got a big root that crosses across the front here. And then from this view, it's pretty narrow as well through here. So to me, we're looking at probably two potential fronts on this tree. Probably somewhere kind of right around in here, or somewhere almost on the opposite side of the tree. So the next issue is we need to work our way up the trunk and look at the structure of the trunk. So we want to find the most interesting movement or some sort of characteristic that we can show off in the trunk. So throughout this whole process, what I'm looking to do is identify features and flaws of the tree. So things that we want to show off and things that we want to eliminate or hide if we can't eliminate them. Right? So with a tree like this, we're looking for potential deadwood in the trunk, nice movement through the trunk. I want to eliminate parallel and perpendicular lines if possible. Right? So if we keep this tree on this angle, let's just take this as a potential front here, kind of somewhere in this area here. If you look, moving up the trunk right through this area here, this first portion of the trunk right in here, this has kind of a pigeon-breasted look to it, which isn't really an ideal situation. Anytime you've got a pigeon-breasted area in the trunk, it's best if you can hide that, either put it towards the rear or shift the angle of the tree in a way that sort of offsets that. Visually, it just never looks very good to have kind of that belly sticking out on the front side of the trunk. Moving further up the trunk, though, there's a lot of movement up in this area that's quite nice through here. We do have a section here, though, that's almost parallel to the ground, and a section here that's nearly perpendicular to the ground, which isn't really ideal, so we might want to shift the angle of the tree if we were to use this as the front. We also have some nice deadwood features from this side that are quite nice. Now, one flaw here is that it looks like there was probably a very big branch, or even potentially the main trunk, that was cut off right here, so there's a huge scar in this area. So that's not really ideal. Typically in Japan with black pines, you don't see a lot of deadwood on the trunks. That doesn't mean you can't have deadwood on the trunks. It's just not something that's typically done with black pines per se. So maybe we want to try to hide that by shifting the tree one direction or the other to put that more towards the rear of the plant. So that's a potential flaw here. The parallel nature of this, the perpendicular nature of this right through here, and then the pigeon-breasted area right through here make this maybe not the most ideal front to the tree, but there are some nice features on that side. Now if we flip the tree completely around to the opposite side here, we eliminate that pigeon-breasted look. The base of the trunk actually runs slightly away and then slightly forward again, rather than the opposite way. So it actually goes towards the rear and then back towards the front, which is a more ideal situation. We've eliminated that pigeon-breasted look. We still have the issue here of it being parallel and perpendicular, but we've hidden that scar on the trunk to the rear of the tree, right? So you don't really see that if we were to use somewhere over here as the front, right? Moving up through the trunk through here, the placement of the branches from this particular front is actually almost better than the original front that we looked at, because we've got a nice directional branch down here. You see a lot of movement. The apex kind of leans forward towards us. We've got a great branch back here that we could use to create some depth on the tree. So overall, just based on the features and the flaws, I think that probably this side is going to be a better front for the tree. What do you guys think? Probably pretty good. And I think this tree was probably designed in this way to use that as the front to start with. So it's made the job all that much easier in choosing the front. But I just want you guys to understand sort of the process, or at least my process, in figuring out how to design a piece of material like this that's raw or semi-raw. When we get into that tree, it'll become even more important because that's a totally raw piece of material. It's completely different than this. So, okay. Now, with that in mind, we need to figure out if we want to shift the tree slightly one direction or the other to see if we can offset those two issues that are still remaining, meaning the parallel area here and the perpendicular area here. So there really are only two options. We can tilt the tree more to the right, or we can lift the tree more upright. So we'll try both of these and see which one looks the best. Right? That made it worse, right? Now this area is totally parallel and this is totally perpendicular. So if we're going to raise it up, we got to go a lot further than that. So I'm going to keep stacking these here. If I can get you to hold this down for me. So we're going to keep going until we get this off here. Under there? Okay. Let's try this. All right, we'll do it that way. Is that going to hold? Okay. That gets us up a little bit. All right, so that takes care of this section, but this still doesn't look great up here. But what we've done by doing this is brought this up. This elbow now becomes more of a feature, and then it dips back down on itself, which may be a good thing. When you bring the apex up like this, more over the base of the tree, in 9 times out of 10 cases, it's going to balance the tree a little bit better visually. It doesn't always mean that the apex has to be directly over the base of the tree. Quite often, if the apex is offset one direction or the other, it gives it a lot more dynamism, makes it more interesting and unique. But if you want to create kind of instant balance, the easiest way to do that is to orient the apex nearly directly over the base of the tree. Right, now, one of the main features on this tree is the movement up in this area right through here. This is really nice. So if you have a big feature on a tree, one of the best ways to show off that feature is to raise it up in the design rather than dropping it down. Right, so now that we've tilted this up, we've brought this section right here, this movement right through this area, further up. And if we use the foliage in a certain way to create kind of a picture frame to show that area off, I think it'll stand out quite a bit more. So this is one potential option here, raising the tree up like this. Now, if we're going to do this, we're going to have to reduce the apex. We're going to drop it down into this area so it's not so high. The higher this is here, the more it detracts and takes away from the feature of the tree, which again is this area right through here. So we're going to have to figure out a way to drop the apex down in this area if we decide to use this as the main angle of the tree. All right, I'm going to take this out. We're going to flip the tree the opposite way. Actually, we'll just spin the tree around this way. Let's see. Let's try that. Is it going to fall over? Yeah, we'll hold it here. This is the problem with being tall. We have to pull this up so I can see the tree. All right, so here's another potential option. We could lean the tree the opposite way, still keeping this as the front. Now again, The problem is when you drop the feature of the tree down, it tends to detract from that feature. So to me now what I'm seeing more of is this straight section of the trunk here and the kind of tall, slender area of the trunk at the top where the apex is, and I'm not really noticing much of this area anymore. It might be different from where you guys are sitting because you're down below the tree, so now that I've tilted this down, you're probably seeing this more from where you are. But when we set this tree down at the very end of the demo and you come and look at it from the proper angle, I think that this angle is going to take away from that area more than draw your eye to it. It's also more difficult to balance the tree if we build it this way. The apex is way over here off the base, which again, we can balance it, but we're gonna have to create either the first branch back over here to counterbalance that, or create kind of a semi-cascade type tree, which I don't think this is gonna work very well for this, and it makes, again, this section right here look longer and straighter than it otherwise would if we tilt it up. So I think we're gonna go with the original design and tilt it up the other way. What do you guys think? Is that cool? All right. All right. So. Make sure that's not going to fall. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, all right. So we're going to stick with the original front right here with the original angle, tilting it up like this. Okay, now the next step with this tree is to cut off all of the unnecessary branches on the plant. Now what I want to do with this tree, despite the fact that the main trunk runs to the right, I actually want to make the tree's direction move back to the left. So our main directional branch we're actually going to build with this branch right here. Comes out of the perfect place in the trunk, right on the outside of this curve. That's one of those sort of general guidelines that it's good to follow. It's not necessarily a hard and fast rule that you always have to follow, meaning that sometimes branches can emanate from the inside of a curve, but where that pad ends up is really more important than where the branch comes out. So in other words, if the branch comes out from the inside of the curve, as long as that pad ends up in an area that's not on the inside of the curve but appears to be on the outside of the curve, then it's okay. But if we can eliminate those branches on the inside of the curve in favor of branches on the outside of the curve like this one right here, we're that much better off. So we're lucky we've got a great first branch right here. Now to the rear of the tree, I mentioned we have a nice big branch back here that we can use for depth. The problem is this branch, if you look at it from the side, it's way too long. If we were to drop this down, it'd end up way out here. It's actually longer than our first branch off to the side, so we need to shorten this back quite significantly. Now with pines, all pines have what's called a whorled leaf pattern, so W-H-O-R-L-E-D. So on a branch, you'll have 3 or more buds coming out of the same area in one spot on a branch. So you get this kind of spoked wheel type look with the pines. It's called a whorled leaf pattern. So what you end up with is a situation like this where we've got 1, 2, 3 coming out of the same area here. If you've got 3 or more branches emanating from one point on a pine or really any species, it's going to start swelling in this area here. So we need to cut back to 2s on the entire tree. I want to create just a very basic bifurcating branch structure. So we're going to cut back to 2s on this tree. Now anything that I'm cutting back on here, I'm going to leave a little bit of a stub. This is just sort of a safety net here. If we were to cut this all the way back flush, you guys all right? So these softer branches here, if we were to cut back flush to those, we might run the risk of killing these off. So I'm going to leave a bit of a stub here. This can be removed later this year, so that's not a problem. But what we're going to do is run through the entire tree and look for areas where we've got 3s and we're going to cut back to 2s. I'm also going to remove any branches that are sticking straight up or straight down out of our lateral branches that aren't really usable. The issue with leaving those thick branches that are emanating straight up or straight down, particularly those that are emanating straight up out of our lateral branches, is that those will become stronger over time, and your lateral branches will start to weaken. And what you'll end up with is, say you've got the branch here, you've got a vertical branch coming up out of the top of that. This will become stronger than this over time. It could take 3 years, it could take 5 years, it could take 10 years. This lateral branch, though, will likely die in favor of that upward branch, and then you're just left with this weird elbow-shaped branch that you have to finagle back down. So I want to try to hedge against that by eliminating any of those upright branches early in the process. And this is something you'll want to do on a yearly basis. So for example, maybe one year you need one of those upright branches to fill in some space, so you pull it down to kind of fill in some space, but over time it starts to get too thick, then you can cut it off in favor of smaller back buds on the tree. All right, so with a demo like this, I want you guys to feel comfortable throwing out questions. So if you have any questions throughout this whole process, feel free to shout them out. I think we've got a roaming microphone around here as well. So do we? We do. Okay. So if anybody has any questions, you can throw up your hand and someone will come to you with a microphone so everybody in the room can hear your question.
Maximum amount of foliage you would remove?
So on a black pine like this, is a very healthy tree, and this is actually a good time of year to work on this species because you're kind of midwinter, getting ready to go into spring. So all of the growth from last year is hardened off at this particular point. So we can go through and work on the tree no problem. But what I'm going to do is start out by eliminating all of those 3s, taking them down to 2s, right? So with a tree like this, it looks like we're probably going to end up eliminating, I don't know, maybe 20% of the branches that are like that, that are 3s that we're cutting back to 2s. And then beyond that, I'm going to pluck some of the old needles on this tree. I'm not going to take all of the old needles off necessarily, but what I want to do is try to balance the energy to some degree on a black pine. So I'm looking at each individual bud on the tree. And at this stage, the buds were set last fall for this coming spring. So you can typically tell which buds are going to be strong, which ones are going to be weak, and which ones are going to be kind of a medium strength in between. So around the weak buds, I'm not going to touch the needles at all in those areas. I'm going to leave them alone. The more needles in a given area, the more those needles are feeding that area and strengthening that area. So if it's a weak area, I'm not going to touch those needles at all. If it's a medium strength area, I'll leave somewhere probably between 10 to 12 pairs of needles in a radial pattern around each of those buds. And then if it's a strong bud, I'll leave only about 6 to 8 pairs of needles in those areas around each of those buds. By doing that, that kind of balances the energy to some degree. So overall, we're probably going to end up taking off, I don't know, maybe 40%, 35-40% of the total foliage mass on the tree. And that's not a problem with the black pine like this, particularly if it's healthy. I'm also eliminating I'm eliminating any of the small stubs and dead branches within the tree here so we can clean it up and make it look as nice and refined as possible. All right, so there are a few sort of what I would call objective types of growth that I remove when I'm going through this process. The first I've already mentioned, that's anything heavy coming up out of the top of our lateral growth. Second would be anything that's dangling off the bottom. So that could be a full branch or it could be foliage that's dangling off the bottom. The next would be anything that's long and leggy with just a tuft of foliage at the end. The only time I would leave a branch like that that's long and leggy with just a little foliage at the tip is if that's the only branch we have in that area and we need to keep that branch for future development. So maybe we can get a branch like that to back bud or maybe we can graft further back in on that branch if necessary. But 9 times out of 10, if you can eliminate that type of long leggy branch, I would go ahead and do that up front just to get it out of the way if possible. And that basically will kind of keep you on track. If you kind of follow that guideline for really all trees that you're working with, that'll get you on the right track as to what to remove right from the get-go on any tree. Now when you're working with a pine as well, for the most part try to work from underneath the branches, right? All of these needles, they emanate from the inside up and out like this. So if you're coming in over the top, even just a little bit of bending on some of these needles, in a couple of weeks, the tips of these will start to turn brown. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. So if you come from the underside of the branch, you can actually work the needles from the inside of the tree out, right? Coming from underneath, from the inside out, rather than in this direction. And that'll help you avoid breaking a lot of those branches. All right, so it goes for cleaning up the tree as well as when you start to wire the plant. Any other questions so far?
Can we turn you up a touch?
Can we turn me up a touch? Can we raise the microphone? Maybe a little bit. There we go. Okay.